We have a small but mighty group today. And it's funny how things happen in life. So sometimes you're sitting there, you put all this work in, and then you're like, hey, we have a small group today, but I just was talking about the book Pay It Forward. So anything that we learn in life, anything that we pick up, we can give it forward. And that's the story of the book is, this boy had this message about unity, about connection, about love and caring for others. But little by little through his deeds, people picked it up and they started saying it. And that's how life works, positively or negatively. So that'll be part of our project today. You know, I know that a lot of people here come and they learn and they pay it forward through their families, through their own lives, and in their connections. So the title of today's presentation is called Fences Need Gates. And before we start, your mental health matters. The presentation is one perspective, which is my perspective, but it's not this grand, hey, this is how it should be, this is the one-off on how you should see boundaries. It's a perspective, and I think there's a lot of good things that are going to come of this perspective, but at the same time, it's one perspective. We want to honor the diversity and experiences and the perceptions of our group. Everyone has lived life differently. Last time we had a larger female audience, today we have a larger male audience. When it comes to boundaries, it's not the same, you know, generally speaking for ladies and for gentlemen. It's a different experience. So me speaking as a male on boundaries, I don't necessarily understand holistically how people have experienced things in their lives. So we definitely want to honor and respect that. A little about me as a presenter. My name is Dédalo, Purificação. I've worked in relationship education throughout Kings County, throughout the state of California. I've worked in domestic violence, and my background's in social services as a consultant. And why I'm here is because I care about the community. Having opportunities to connect and have these types of discussions, just only, you know, it's like that saying, rising tide lifts all ships. So the more we talk about positive things, the more positivity we can bring to our community. Please feel free to, you know, raise your hand, share, ask questions. I'm going to try to leave some time at the end. You know, the library closes at 1 today, but if anyone wants to stick around and talk about the presentation or anything that they have, opinions or feelings about it, please feel free to stay. During the presentation, I encourage you to ask questions or to, you know, share as well. So let's get started. So this is inspired by the book Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. Before I go further, I'll say that it has more of a Christian leaning. So if a person identifies with Christianity and that type of faith, it's much more of a Christian book. If someone does not identify with that faith, there'll be, you know, things that are spoken about in there that you might not understand or feel apply to you. However, there's a lot of great wisdom in this book. It's a really, really good book. It's a book that you can reference for particular situations that you're dealing with in regards to boundaries. So, what are some common boundary scenarios in life? Why are we even here? Well, here's a common one, the good old kiddo crying at the grocery store. You know, you have the holidays and your relationships with your loved ones, your family, your friends. You know, money, opinions, scoreboarding, politics, etc. And then, of course, your boss and your coworkers, office politics, professionalism, etc. With that said, some boundaries are full stop, and others are negotiable. There are some things that we have to say, hey, no, that ends right now. You can't do that. You're going to a concert and someone grabs your tush, you say, hey, that's enough. You know, I used to work with the college kids. A lot of that kind of stuff happens, you know. That's a full stop boundary. We stop it right now. Others are negotiable. When we don't have healthy boundaries, what can happen over time? We accumulate stress, anxiety, that which can lead to burnout. We can have communication breakdowns with our loved ones, with our friends, with our coworkers. Has anyone ever heard of, like, you know, at work HR getting involved just because people can't connect and communicate on their differences? Issues with family, not talking to each other for long periods of time over simple communication breakdown. One of the big ones is that we can lose our individuality if we don't have boundaries. The people that don't have boundaries in their community with their family and friends, they're almost like public property. People can come and go and utilize them and tell them how it's going to be, and the person loses a sense of self. So having proper boundaries is also a way of self-love. People that don't have healthy boundaries usually have decreased self-esteem and confidence. They don't believe in themselves as much. They don't think as highly of themselves because they can't create those boundaries, and people usually kind of dictate things for them. And And they're more apt to suffer from manipulation and exploitation of others. People that don't have boundaries are easier targets for people who are manipulative and exploitative. And ultimately, not having healthy boundaries can lead over time to physical health problems and much more. Psychological problems, things of that nature, challenges. So, what are some benefits of having healthy boundaries? Let's think on the positive side. Having healthy boundaries can reduce a lot of stress, anxiety, and burnout. You're expressing yourself, you're expressing your needs, you're open with others. Therefore, you have less stress. You're not holding as much things in. You're having less anxiety about things. Increase self-esteem and respect. You respect yourself because you have guidelines, you have principles, you have boundaries that say, hey, this is my limitations, and I trust myself to enforce those boundaries. You have improved communication. One of the things that's underrated about setting boundaries is and I don't want to use the word forces, but it encourages you to communicate. You have to say, literally, even if you don't say anything, you put your hand in front of you, that's a form of communication. If you say stuff, you're talking about it, you're setting the goals, the principles, the rationale as to why you have the boundary. You're getting better at sharing your feelings with others, and it's very important. You have greater independence. People that set healthier boundaries generally are more independent people. They're people that rely more on themselves than on others. They're not as codependent. They're people that have a great sense of self. It'll improve your mental well-being, and you'll have healthier relationships with people over time, because the misnomer is, well, if I do everything that everyone wants, my relationships will be better. If I just give of myself to the family or to friendships or to work or what have you, it'll be better. Actually, it's worse. People get accustomed to your boundaries not being there, and then they go deeper and deeper and deeper, and they ask more of you and more of you. And therefore, the relationship is not healthy, because a relationship isn't healthy when one person thinks it's healthy. A relationship is healthy holistically when both people involved feel respected, and that's what is the benefit of healthy boundaries. So, to know thyself and to know thy people. When we set boundaries, it's contextual. Okay, so if we look at our personalities, I'm using this one, is called the DISC format of personalities. There's dominant types of personalities, there's influential personalities, there's personalities that are considered to be steady, and conscientious personalities. So using myself as an example, because it's the quickest, easiest way, I'm a direct person, I'm strong-willed, I'm firm, I'm outgoing, I'm optimistic, I can be lively at times. I'm patient and accommodating, analytical. Yeah, I'd say all of those. So, being that I have a lot of dominant and steady and influential personalities, if I'm dealing with someone who's private and I'm outgoing, if I'm dealing with someone who is patient but I'm strong-willed and firm, you can already see the issues that can occur in boundary setting. Not only do we have to know who we are and how we set boundaries with others, but we have to understand, who are we setting boundaries with? Can they handle our type of communication? Can we handle their type of communication? And just even before we start the process of setting a boundary, knowing who we're dealing with is very important. Have you guys ever heard, like at work, for example, people talk about, like, oh, you got to go talk to so-and-so? Uh-oh. You ever heard that before? Like, uh-oh, here we go. You're going to go talk to so-and-so. We're going to deal with so-and-so, especially if so-and-so is the boss and they have control over things. Why do we say that? Because we know that they have a certain type of personality, probably like a dominant or an influential personality. We're worried, we're stressed. So understanding who you're talking to, understanding who you are is really important, because not only do we not want to feel like we're being treated a certain type of way, but we don't want to impress ourselves on others too hard as well. Here's the thing that I don't hear talked about very often when I was working on this is emotional immaturities. When we're talking about setting boundaries with others, remember, we're in a position of like surprise. If you've ever read Sun Tzu's The Art of War, he talks a lot about like surprise attacks, or like having the advantage of coming in and knowing the information before the other person does. Generally, when a person's setting a boundary, you know kind of what you want. You've thought about it. Hey, I want this person to be this way, or I want this situation to be like this. And we got to understand that when we're introducing that information to another person, they might not know what's coming. They might not know that there's a problem in the first place. And so we have to be aware of potential emotional immaturities before our normal boundary setting. And when I say emotional immaturities, I'm not saying that we are emotionally immature or that other people are. It's that there are things within us that might feel a sense of entitlement to say, you know what, I'm right on this, but we're not aware of the process, how important the process of connecting and how positive boundary setting can be if we go about it in a healthy way. So we should ask ourselves some questions like, am I projecting my beliefs, strengths, and weaknesses onto this person? I'm going to tell a story later on about when I used to work with teenagers as a residential counselor. In some positions in your workplace or in your life, you are more experienced, you are more capable, and you have more understanding of things than others. Think of like a parent, for example, teaching a kid how to clean or how to run errands or how to do this. Right off the bat, if you have a child that's 10 years old and you're 40 years old, you have so much more advantage of knowledge, of strength, of understanding than that child. So how do we go about setting the boundary? The process of how we set boundaries can dictate the kinds of relationships we have with people. It can have a tremendous effect on trust and our ability to make connections and boundaries later on. So understanding, am I being too forceful? Is this person capable of this right now? Or can I help them learn the boundary? Am I teaching them the boundary, or am I just telling them the boundary? Because the person might have certain weaknesses. What attitude and emotions are inspiring my feelings? What is inspiring you to go to someone and say, hey, I have this boundary with you? Is it a healthy attitude? Are they healthy emotions? It's important to have a good attitude about how you approach the situation. Even if we're 100% right and we know we're right, if we come in with a bad attitude and we come in with an escalatory, I think I made up a new word, and an escalation mindset, we can create a situation that should be really connective and intimate into something that's dangerous or something that can lead to a lot of problems. So thinking about your attitude and your emotions, are you really emotional right now while you're trying to set this boundary? If you are, you might need a timeout. You might need to say, hey, I want to talk to you about some stuff, but I need to get myself right. I need to kind of organize my thoughts, and then I'll share them with you. And if you need to organize your thoughts, you can come back to me, because I don't want to ambush you with this boundary. Am I being patient and or understanding? One thing that I always, when I talk about relationships, is understanding doesn't mean you agree with people. You can understand someone and not agree with them. It's okay. It's very healthy. But it's really important to understand. Are you being patient with the person? Are you being understanding? Do you understand where they're coming from? You might be setting a boundary with someone and you might see their behavior as being defensive. Well, rather than saying, you're being defensive, ask, hey, I notice it feels to me that you're feeling a certain type of way. Do you want to talk about your feelings right now before we go further? Often in relationships, when there's problems connecting or there isn't a consensus or agreement, sometimes people start to point fingers. Well, you're being this, you're being difficult, you're being defensive, you're being emotional, you're being this. Sometimes it's good to be patient, stop, and check in and say, hey, I notice I'm asking you to do this type of thing for our relationship. I'm asking you to have this boundary, and I notice I feel like some stress from you. Can we talk about that real fast? Because I don't want to go any further if it's troubling. Because maybe what the person just needs is a little bit more clarification. They need you to be more in-depth in what you need. How am I treating the person? Very important. You're setting a boundary with a person. Generally, it's your family, coworkers, children, your relationships. Well, in some way, shape, or form, you care. You care enough to give them the time to set that boundary, or it's necessary. And particularly like in the workplace or with family, we don't want to mortgage our job. We don't want to destroy our relationships with our loved ones. So being very aware of how we're treating someone else is really important. Are we talking in a positive way about this boundary? Are we saying, hey, this is actually going to be good. This is why I'm introducing this, because it's going to make in my opinion, it's going to make our relationship better. It's going to be a healthy thing. Or are we saying, well, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen, and that's the end of it, and you have no say in the matter. You know that that's not a healthy way to dictate to others. Am I being proactive, responsive, or reactive? So when we're setting a boundary, think of it as like you're mowing your lawn. You're setting a boundary, you're doing maintenance. maintenance on your relationship. This is very healthy. The idea that boundaries, sometimes people get really concerned if someone's going to sit them down and talk to them about something difficult. It's okay. This is maintenance. We brush our teeth, we take showers, we mow our lawn, we change the oil in our cars. When I used to teach relationship classes, I used to talk to the guys about it. I'd say, hey, tell me what you do to keep your truck running great. And the guy would sit there and, I change the oil and I check the tire pressure and, I make sure that I put the fuel injector cleaner in it every time I do that, and I rotate the tires when I change the oil. And I'd say, well, what do you guys do to maintenance your relationship? And it would be silent. Because in society, we've been told, things just should work. If you have a kid, that's your kid. You love your kid. If you have a marriage, you love your marriage. You promise yourself under a higher power. The reality of the situation is that we have to be proactive. We have to maintenance our relationships. We have to be responsive to others and not reactive. Okay, so when we're setting our boundary, before we set our boundary, think about it. Am I being proactive in setting this boundary? Am I being vindictive? Am I trying to get revenge because someone hurt me, so I'm saying now I'm going to stick it to you and you can't do this anymore? Or am I trying to say, hey, this is actually healthy, I need this, you might not like this, but it's good in the long term of our relationship. And you don't like this? I'm going to be responsive and listen to you and hear you and say my piece, rather than being reactive and saying, well, you're difficult and you're a bad person and da-da-da-da-da. What are our abilities and our limitations? So, like I said earlier about knowing thyself and knowing others, what are the limitations, what are the limiting factors potentially of ourselves and the other person? I was talking about personalities, and we had talked about the conscientious personality. That person might be introverted. They might not be someone who talks a lot. So if someone like me walks in the room and starts setting a boundary with that person, it's going to be me talking for half an hour and the other person having to digest all that. What are their abilities? What are their limitations? So if someone is not a big talker, if someone is not someone who can listen for a long period of time, am I going to sit there and lecture to them about the boundary for half an hour? Maybe it's someone who it would be better if I sent them an email or wrote them a letter, or maybe it would be better if I sat down with my thoughts and said, hey, I know who this person is, and I'm going to make sure that when I say it respectfully and I keep it short so they have room to speak. And I'm going to give them room to speak, right? So this is where you become a very powerful person, because now you're not only thinking about yourself and your boundaries, but you're thinking about others in a way that respects the relationship. Remember, as we talked about earlier about the positives of setting boundaries, when you're conscientious, when you're aware of emotional maturities, you become stronger, you become more empowered, you have more wisdom and effect to do positive change. Because remember, we're not here to control, we're here to affect positive change. That's what a boundary is. We want things to be better and not to be, I want to keep this from getting bad. When we're setting boundaries, this is really important, is to be wary of transference. Transference is when you experience feelings in the present that really belong to some unfinished business from the past. Often in life, we've experienced things. I'm about to be 41 years old. I have lots of experiences. Sometimes you'll experience someone and they'll remind you of something that happened to you in the past. Or you see something coming at work, or with a child, or with a friendship, and you're like, I had a really bad experience about this in the past, I don't even want to go there. I'm going to shut this down. Or, you're acting like so-and-so used to act, so I'm not going to give you the time of day because so-and-so really hurt me. We see this a lot when I was teaching relationship education. A lot of couples, they would reference their parents. My mom was this way to me, and my dad was this way to me, and I'm not going to tolerate it. And I would ask people sometimes, I'd say, how long have you guys been together? We've been together 1 year. I say, how old are you? 35 years old. And I'd say, for 34 years of your life, you lived without this person. Yet, they come into your life the first year, and they're getting a wave of 34 years of experience that you had with your parents. So your parents have 34 years to shape you in the relationship you have with them. This person's only had 1 so far. So, like I said earlier about being patient, being respectful, being understanding, these are important things that we have to pay attention to. Am I feeling trauma? Bad experiences from the past, am I projecting them onto others? It might even be the same person that hurt you. You see this a lot in relationships with parents. Parents hurt the kids are traumatized, they're hurt, and they don't let go of it. And they pay it back to the parents over many, many years. You see it in relationships and marriages. There was a trauma that happened in the marriage, year 5 of the marriage, but in year 45, they're still talking about it, even though it might not have happened again. And so we want to be very considerate of transference when it comes to boundaries. And lastly, before we get into working on the boundaries, is mind reading. The joke I used to say when I used to teach relationship classes is like the De Beers commercials, big diamond on the ring, and the diamonds are forever, you know? Diamonds, love is just a beautiful thing, and diamonds are forever. And it creates this idea that when you love someone and you marry someone, that's it. Like, we are connected and bonded. And because we might buy into that and not think about the maintenance and the work and the effort that we have to put into each other, someone might say, well, you should know. You should have known. You should know better. And you know what? You might be right. But what's more important in life, being right or having healthy relationships? So when I was doing some creative writing, I wrote this once, is in the absence of communication, everything can be left to interpretation. So if we're not talking about our boundaries, if we're not talking about our needs, if we're not talking about our wants, or if we're not asking what our partner might want or might need, we really don't know. We're really just interpreting each other constantly. I used to take family notes, family meeting. You sit down, oh, what are we talking about today? I take notes because I want to know, hey, do you need this? Is this what we should be doing? What are we doing moving forward? Because I didn't want to be interpreting my partner. So mind reading is not a fair, sustainable thing. We would love in the perfect world someone to read us. They know we're not feeling good. They know we need this, but that's not fair and sustainable. It should just be a pleasant surprise. Oh, I love coffee in the morning. Thank you for bringing me coffee. Oh, that was pleasant of you to do. Oh, you forgot to bring me coffee today? You don't love me anymore. Those are not a healthy way of doing things. Take ownership of communicating your needs. They are ultimately your responsibility. If you have needs, they're your responsibility. It's not everyone else's responsibility if you want things done a certain way. If you want someone to do something a certain way, you need to communicate that. You need to create that boundary. You need to connect with someone. Let's look at an example process of setting a boundary. I use the term getting into the lab. Think of it as a laboratory. What do we do in a laboratory? What kind of stuff do people do in laboratories?
They examine.
They examine, right? Mm-hmm. There's another E word that I'm looking for.
Experiment.
The experiment, right? Examine, experiment. Decide the boundary, get in the lab and experiment. Now, when we do experiments in America, we have rules, right? We have, no one can just do the Wild West of experiments, right? So you gotta have rules. So you don't experiment on other people. You experiment on your own. You test to make sure, hey, am I deciding the boundary, is this reasonable? You might talk to some friends. You might, if someone's seeking counseling, you might say, hey, I'm gonna create this boundary, I'm gonna talk to my counselor about it. You might have a faith base, talk to your pastor, talk to some trusted people, etc. But get in the lab and decide the boundary. Start experimenting with what that looks like. You need to choose your limits in regards to the boundary. Okay, boundaries can be on a spectrum. They don't always have to be fine and rigid. So what are you going to allow and not allow? Again, you're in the lab. This is before you're even approaching the person. You're saying, what am I going to allow? Like, so if you have setting a boundary with your child, and you say, hey, I want to make sure that every day you make your bed, and if you don't make your bed, or how often am I going to understand when someone doesn't make their bed? So in your head you might say, oh, as long as they make their bed 5 days out of the week, out of 7 days, I won't throw a fit. But you start kind of having a negotiation with yourself rather than the person. And then you got to determine the consequences and the rewards. So if you're in a relationship and your boundary is, I don't want you raising your voice or yelling at me, you have to sit down and determine in the lab and during your experimentation to say, what are going to be the consequences if this person yells at me after we agree that that's the boundary? And because boundaries don't always have to be ugly, and boundaries don't always have to be about being consequential and setting apart differences from others, what if this person actually does what I asked them to do? What if I set this boundary for this person not to raise their voice, and they don't raise their voice for 2 months? Like, maybe I might want to take them out to dinner, and at dinner I'll thank them for respecting me and from learning from their mistakes and so on and so forth. And if they don't, if I set this boundary and every other day they're yelling at me, or once a week they're yelling at me or raising their voice, my consequence might be that I leave the relationship. I'm not interested in being with this person anymore. So you've been in the lab now. Now you're ready to go and to discuss the boundary. But when you go to discuss the boundary, remember, you're a teacher. You're teaching the boundary because the person hasn't even heard it yet because you've been in the lab. So you're teaching the boundary holistically. So encompassing all of the boundary, right? So when we go to teach a boundary to somebody, we don't say, well, I just want you to stop doing this and that's it. That would be perfect. Maybe you're very stoic and you don't have much to say, and there's a time and a place for everything, right? There are certain boundaries where it's very cut and dry and simple. It's very understandable. But often in life, when we're dealing with family, children, coworkers, the boundaries aren't always so cut and dry, and where we can just say that's it, that's how it's going to be. When you're discussing the boundary with the person, when you've showed up, you're face to face, you want to express the boundary holistically. You want to explain it as if it's someone that has never heard it before, and you need to be thorough about it. Because the more thorough you can be in a healthy way and in a kind way, the more that they learn. Because you're really teaching them and they're learning. So what happens usually after you tell someone something you want to do or you want from them? What do you usually hear back from them? Feedback. They give you feedback. Hey, that's actually a really good idea. You know what? I apologize. I've been doing things this way. I'm going to do it that way. So you start to get feedback. Well, feedback isn't just something that goes right by you. The feedback that they're giving you is something you can learn from. So some of the feedback might not be positive, it might be negative. Say, you know what, that's really not fair. It's not fair for you to ask me to mow the lawn when you know I have band practice and I don't want to be sweaty and I got all this other stuff going on. Can we figure out a way to have the lawn mowed on a day that I can actually do it and I feel comfortable doing it? And they're giving you feedback, they're learning, and you're discussing holistically and creating this boundary. It could be something like, I use the yelling example, which yelling can be construed as abuse. Well, maybe the person might give you feedback. They might say, you know what, I'm dealing with a lot of tension at work. I'm dealing with a lot of problem. I'm actually kind of angry at one of our kids, or I'm having this, or I'm having all these mixed feelings. I'm wrong to yell. At the same time, I need help. Maybe I need some help because I can't guarantee that I'm not going to yell the next time something happens. And you're learning, okay, this person's giving me feedback, so maybe there's a program, maybe we can go to counseling, maybe there's something we can do to help support this person. They're recognizing they have a problem, but they're also telling me that they might cross that boundary, right? We know yelling is not healthy or appropriate, but at least they're being honest with us, okay? So what do you do next? Well, after you've explained the boundary, you discuss the consequences and rewards that you came up with in the lab. So if you're talking to your child, you might say, hey, I've thought up that if it doesn't work out where you can't keep up with the laundry or mowing the lawn or doing these things that I've expressed to you, the consequences is you're going to be grounded for 2 days. So when you don't do that, I'm just going to ground you for 2 days, and that's going to be the consequence. You're not going to be able to use your phone, you're not going to be able to be on the laptop, you're not going to be able to play games, you're not going to be able to go out. And I actually also thought that if you do this, and you can keep it up, every month I want to take you and a friend out to a pizza party. And then go out and have some pizza, go hang out, go do some fun, or I'll give you a little bit extra on your chore money or what have you. Working with a relationship, the consequences might be, hey, you yell, you scare me, you scare the kids, you raise your voice, you act this way. I cannot deal with it anymore. And I've told you that there's this boundary, and I just need to let you know the consequences, which might be, I might leave the relationship. I might consider leaving the relationship. I might be in a situation where I'm going to do it this way or what have you. When you're discussing boundaries with people, and I could have put a note here, but if someone's on drugs, if someone's drinking alcohol, if someone has a history of violence, right? Because I'm talking about yelling, I'm talking about relationships. Like, we need to also understand, going back to that earlier slide about personalities, know thyself and know thy person, right? So if a person has a history of abuse, they have a history of alcoholism, they have a history of drugs, they have a history of whatever, like, we might not be able to discuss a boundary with them in person. We might not feel safe doing that. And so this is where you stay in the lab to choose your limits and say, well, maybe when I go to talk to this person, I'm not talking to them alone. I'm talking to them with their brother, or with my brother, or with my friend, or I'm not in the house. I wrote them an email. I gave them a phone call. Relationships ending. Those are basically boundaries. You're saying, oh, here's this boundary. You used to be my partner, you're not my partner anymore. This is how I see it. Well, I've encouraged a lot of people before that have dealt with different types of abuse. You break up over the phone. If that's how you feel safest, you break up over the phone. You don't owe nobody nothing. So you don't owe nobody. If you're not feeling safe, you don't owe it to them. So if the boundary is literally like, I'm scared to set a boundary with this person. I'm scared to set a boundary with my boss. Well, you call it human resources. You get together in the lab with human resources and you say, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what I'm thinking. What do you guys think? What's within the rule structure? And how can we do this in a way where I don't have to directly deal with this person one-on-one because they intimidate me or I feel a certain type of way about them. So I'm just trying to cover all the bases here because obviously the first thing people are going to think are, well, gosh, what about when I'm dealing with this type of person? So discussing the boundaries holistically, even with someone who's unhealthy, you might have to do it in a different context. You don't always have to do it in person. And then you follow through on your agreements. So after you've discussed your boundaries with the person, you've learned from them, you've discussed the consequences and rewards, you've gotten their feedback, you guys have come to an understanding on what the boundary actually is. Even if it's not 100% perfect, you have to follow through on your agreements. What happens if we don't follow through with our kids when we tell them we're going to ground them? Sexual harassment. If you don't tell someone to stop, what are they going to do? They're going to keep doing stuff. They're going to keep being inappropriate. In relationships, domestic violence, all kinds of different issues, boundaries with our family. If you don't say nothing, they're going to keep being themselves. So I wanted to share a quick example of, I used to work as a residential counselor with teenagers. You know, I'm talking about very serious boundaries at the moment, but this is something that I find to be very small. But when you're working in a bureaucracy, when you're working with organizations, sometimes they're sticklers for the rules. And the rules don't necessarily take care of the humanity of a person. And so this boundary is more of a work boundary, but I think parents would understand this too. So we had this youth, and he was having trouble fulfilling his rules. One of them was literally sweeping his kitchen and vacuuming the living room of his apartment. And the rule structure in the organization said if he doesn't do it so many times a week, we can kick him out. Now this is a homeless kid. This is a kid that is at risk and homeless, parents are on the streets, and he has a home right now. And just because he's not sweeping, just because he's not vacuuming, he has the potential to be put back on the streets. And I had people that I was working with who were like, yeah, we're gonna kick him out tomorrow. Well, I came on shift, it was on a weekend, and the first thing I saw when I saw the communication law, I saw this story and I said, well, I need to go up there and talk to this kid. Because he's gonna be on the streets if he doesn't do these things. So I sat down in the office and I said, well, what am I gonna do? Because the boundary's kind of been set already, but the consequences are coming. And I wanna help him understand, you know, how he can have the things he wants. 'Cause I don't think he wants to be on the streets. So I went upstairs and I discussed the boundary holistically with him. I sat there and I said, hey buddy, you're not doing your sweeping. You're not vacuuming. The administration is recommending that you're gonna get kicked out next week. And what did I learn? See, this is the important part about learning. Because if you just go up there and say, oh, this kid's lazy, he doesn't want to do nothing, he's a lost cause, he's going to go on the streets and do drugs and all this stuff that people can think, then you're creating that reality that you're imposing upon that child or that person. I decided to go up there and tell him about it, and I said, and he starts telling me, he starts crying. I get nervous. I get nervous to fail. I don't want to get emotional talking about it. I get nervous to sweep. If I don't sweep good enough, people are going to say things to me. People are going to put me down. If I don't vacuum good enough, it's going to be this, it's going to be that. And I learned that it had nothing to do with him being lazy. It had to do with the fact that he was scared of disappointing others. He was terrified of being held accountable for his inadequacies. So what did I do? Well, the boundary's still there. You gotta sweep, you gotta vacuum. But now it became, hey, let's teach you how to sweep. Let's teach you how to vacuum so you can be empowered, so you can feel good about yourself. And I'll show you what vacuuming right in our environment, in our ecosystem of this shelter looks like. So that way you can feel comfortable and give me feedback to let me know if you feel comfortable doing it right. So I sat up there with him and we vacuumed and we swept and we cleaned his dishes and we did everything that we did. And I got the feedback. I also talked to him about the consequences. Hey, they're gonna put you on the street. They're gonna kick you out. And the reward, you're gonna get to stay if you do these things. And he gave me, I don't wanna be on the streets. I don't wanna get kicked out. Which gave me more incentive to help him learn how to work the boundary. So this is an example of how we can connect with people. You know, like the title of the presentation, fences need gates. Boundaries aren't just fences. They're not places where we make a fence and lob bombs over the fence at each other. No, the gate is where we let people in and we work together. Because, yeah, that boundary is always going to be there, bud. You're always going to have to sweep. You're always going to have to vacuum. It's always going to be there. But now I've empowered you. And now we understand the consequences and the rewards on a deeper level because now we've worked on you sweeping and vacuuming and you feel comfortable and you're telling me to my face, you can do this now. And then guess what he did? He did it. And he was a shining example and he got to stay there for the whole term. You know, how we look at boundaries defines how we create them. Think of a normal, healthy boundary like hosting a guest in your home, rather than stopping an invader from climbing your wall. There are situations where we have to stop an invader. We talked about that earlier with the Drake meme. You know, someone comes and touches you or starts, you know, being very inappropriate. There are certain things that we have to say, hey, stop, no, none of that. But most of the time, realistically, with family, with coworkers, with friends, and our children, to me, boundary is like a home. Well, a home has natural boundaries, right? It has walls, it has doors, it has windows. So it is a boundary. But it also has doors for opening, windows for letting in the air. It's protective, but it's also inclusive. You see people coming over. So when you're setting a boundary, it's like, you know, I'm Portuguese, they bring you in the home, they want to show you the whole house. Oh, here's the living room that we never sit in, only when you come over. Oh, here's the kitchen, here's this, you know, here's the food, you want some water. Oh, let me show you, they'll even show you their own bedrooms. Oh, look at my bedroom, you know, this is, you know, my kid was born in here, this happened, all this crazy stuff. You go to the islands, you hear those stories. Why do we do that? Why do we do that? Because it's a connective experience. If we just stand at the front door and we say, yeah, this is my door, this is my home, nobody can come in, we're creating a wall. But a home is a protective structure that's also inclusive. That's what a boundary can be, a protective structure that is inclusive. And so when you set the boundary, you're showing them all the rooms of your house. You're saying, yeah, you know, this is how I'd like things to be. This is how I feel. This is what I think is an appropriate boundary. This is what I think is an appropriate consequence if this boundary isn't respected. And these are appropriate rewards for if we are able to agree on these boundaries. And then a person sits in your living room of your boundary with you and they say, you know what? I agree with 60% of what you're saying. The other 40% I'd like to talk about. You sit in the living room, you have some tea and some coffee. The living room of your boundary, and you have that tea or coffee and you discuss and you hash out your boundary. That's what a normal, healthy boundary can be like, right? You teach people how to treat you. You want to be specific. As I used in the example earlier about working with the youth, I was very specific with this is how you sweep, this is how you vacuum. It's a connective experience. And people are always going to give you feedback if you're being too specific, if you're being too long-winded. That's part of the deal. Someone's going to tell you, and you get to learn from it. We're all going to make mistakes when we're setting boundaries. I've made quite a few in my life. And sometimes it's a funny experience, and it actually makes it more connected to laugh at yourself or to laugh at a situation. Understand that it is in your nature to grow, and everyone doesn't grow at your pace. It's very important. Nowadays you hear, oh man, like if someone's not on my level, get them out of my life. Good vibes only, this and this and that. You know, sometimes we grow quicker than the other person does. You see this a lot in middle school with girls and boys. I've always noticed that the girls become more mature quicker. The boys are still goofing off on a different level. And it takes them a while to catch up. Some people might argue it takes their whole lives to catch up. But, you know, you grow at a different pace. But also with that understanding that you might grow quicker than others, you might also grow slower than others. You might be setting a boundary and thinking that this is healthy for you, but in reality, it might not be a healthy boundary. That goes into the idea of don't believe everything you think. Just because you think it doesn't mean it's necessarily great. Oh, you need to do things all this way, and this is how it's got to be. And the other person says, well, actually, that's not how the world works. I don't think that's really fair. And then you sit down and have a discussion, or maybe you discuss it with a handful of people and say, you know what, D, like, that's actually not a healthy boundary. You get feedback, because you might not grow at the pace others grow as well. Understand that you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? So you could do all the stuff that I just talked about perfectly. You can pull back the arrow and hit it right dead center. And you just teed it up for them. Here you go, here's our connective experience. I listened to D, I did my background research, I'm perfect. You still can't make him drink. You need to have someone who wants to be involved. And we're going to talk about this later. You cannot force boundaries onto people. Typical relationship, we're not forcing our boundaries on others. So at some point you're going to run into someone who doesn't care. They don't care if the relationship's going to end. They don't care if you're upset. They don't care if you're hurt. Be realistic and appropriate. Find common ground. So it's really important when you're thinking, when you're in the lab, being realistic about what kind of boundary you're putting in. Doesn't mean you have to come from a place of fear and say, oh, well, they're not going to do this, so I'm not going to ask for much. No, it's okay to ask for what you think you might not get. That's part of negotiating and connecting. But you want to be realistic and you want to be appropriate. Consider the other person's life. Consider the other person. Consider yourself and your well-being. Sometimes, have we ever had situations in life where we don't set boundaries because we know the boundary is more stressful than not having a boundary? Like if I tell the person this is going to cause more stress than if not? You know, these are things that we have to consider. It doesn't mean it's right, but we have to consider it because, as we'll talk about later in the presentation, there are options when nothing works that we have to consider. Be compassionate and don't demand sacrifice. Sacrifice is not a sustainably healthy strategy. If your boundary involves the other person having to constantly sacrifice, it's not going to last more often than not. It's just not a sustainable strategy. Either it's not going to last, or they're going to become resentful or angry and be like, you know what, I'm the one who's sacrificing. You don't have to do all this stuff, I do. And that can become a problem. So being compassionate and not demanding sacrifice and not threatening. You know, when I talked earlier about consequences, it's so easy in the wrong hands for telling someone the consequences to feel like you're getting a lot of power. And when a person might feel a lot of power, they might not know that they're threatening someone. We don't want to threaten someone. We want to inform them. There's a difference between threatening and informing. You say, hey, if we can't agree, I'm not threatening you, but I'm just telling you I will leave this relationship. Like that's how it's going to be. This is not a threat. This is a consequence of if we cannot get along. It's something that we can't work out. I'm not threatening you because I hate you. I'm actually talking to you because I want to be connected. But we also want to be fair and appropriate, right? I just love this thing because it's from Full House. There's a great episode in Full House where Michelle is doing politeness week. And she's being extra nice to everybody. And then she goes to Stephanie, her sister, and she says, I think it's like a cookie or something. She's like, may I have a cookie, please? And she says it perfectly. And then Stephanie says kindly back, no, you may not. And then Michelle's so confused because she feels entitled. Hey, I'm being polite. I'm doing the right things in politeness week, and you're not giving me what I want. But that's not how it works. Just because you're a good person, just because you're polite, doesn't mean you're going to get what you want. So what did Michelle do? She went from being polite to say, politeness week is over, and she grabbed the cookie and ran out, right? Because she was like, forget you, I'll just take what I want. And I love that episode. It was a very wholesome and healthy show. And it speaks to what I'm talking about. Well, what if nothing works? What if you're doing everything right, you do all the research, you read all the literature, you get in the lab, you're really trying to connect to this person, coworker, family, child, relationship, and nothing works. It's like a stone wall that you're talking to. Well, we ought to be open to our basic inability to change things out of our control. This is a dance, setting boundaries. It's voluntary, it's not involuntary. You want volunteers, not hostages. And so when you're setting a boundary, you got to understand, before you even start, this is out of my control. I can only control what I thought of in the lab, what I'm sharing. I can control my reactions, but I cannot control this other person. And if you understand that before you even set the boundary, before you even walk into the room, it gives you a lot of wisdom. It gives you a lot of sympathy and compassion for the other person. If we can't accept things as they are, we have to ask ourselves, can I apply the appropriate consequences? I talked about this earlier. Am I willing to do what I said I was going to do? And this is so important because this is why when you're in the lab experimenting on your consequences and your boundary, you have to come up with something that's appropriate and sustainable. If you tell your child that you love, that if they don't mow the lawn, I'm going to kick you out of the house, are you really willing to kick them out of the house over not mowing the lawn? I think most people would say no. And if that's the case, you should have never told them that in the first place. That should have never been the consequence that was brought up in the first place. So when you're talking about consequences and rewards, when you're setting the boundary, you better be ready to understand that you might have to apply them someday. It might come a point where you have to have that conversation with your family member, your child, your coworkers. And so you better come up with appropriate things that you know you can do, that you feel comfortable doing. Realize when we apply appropriate consequences, we execute the power that we have and stop trying to wield the power no one has, controlling others. That's the power that we have. You can set a boundary, you can apply the consequences that you've agreed upon, and that's it. But what happens in life often is we're trying to wield the power that we don't have, which is controlling situations, controlling our environment, controlling potentially others. And we have to be very careful of that because that can cause a lot of stress on us and that can cause a lot of stress on others. I've made that mistake many times in my life coming up. You learn, it's like, I don't like this. Well, gosh, if everyone else just figured it out, I'd be a happy camper. Well, that's not anything that I can control. That's up to others. What can I control? I can only control myself. I can control how I feel, the boundaries I set, the consequences, etc. And so before we get out of here, I wanted to talk about forgiveness because we just talked about, well, gosh, what if nothing works? Nothing works, right? And we talked about you might even be in a situation where you have to leave a relationship that you love or that you care about because you just can't handle that anymore. And what do you do if things don't work, right? What do you do? Do you hold on to that anger forever? Do you just say life sucks and everything's bad and I'm never going to get along with nobody? Well, forgiveness plays a role in this because we have to have a certain level of non-attachment from the beginning, even to life, our impermanence. We're not going to live forever. In that regard, we're not attached to being here forever. So, understanding that unforgiving people allow others to control them. You have a lack of boundaries. If we cannot forgive, in essence, it's a lack of boundaries. So someone disappoints us, someone doesn't respect our boundaries, we lose that relationship with someone. Well, if we can't forgive, we're always what generally happens, you start thinking about the person, you think bad, everything that reminds you of the person reminds you of those things. It can be something that controls us. And I want to add a final point on this that'll make this make all sense. Forgiveness can lead to productive behavior in the present instead of passive wishes from the past. So the quicker that we can forgive and move on from situations, I'm not saying that every situation demands just like forgiveness, like, oh, I just forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you, like Oprah, you get a forgiveness, you get a forgiveness. But it's just to say that it is a healthier habit to have in life when you can forgive. It can lead to productive behavior. If you don't have those things on your mind, you have more space for other things. Your brain is like a hard drive. It can only take so much. And if you can remove the thoughts of the negative stuff, you have space for your own personal growth and development. We should try our best to forgive. And this is very important. And remember that forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. Just because you forgive someone doesn't mean you're going to go out and have coffee with them. Just because you forgive someone doesn't mean you're going to be buddies. It could be anybody in your life that you're dealing with. The reason that I think a lot of people struggle with forgiveness is because they think that if I forgive someone, I have to be something for them or to them. I have to be connected to them in some way, shape, or form. And that's not necessary. Spiritually speaking, literally, emotionally, like, you can forgive someone and also at the same time understand that, like, hey, we're not buddies anymore. I let it go, I moved on, I wish them the best, but we're not connected. And I think that's a very powerful thing in regards to understanding forgiveness. And lastly, this is really important, some of the stuff here is, make informed decisions about the type of relationship that is possible. Do not project onto them. Some relationships in our lives we inherit. We inherit our family, we inherit our children. We don't get to necessarily choose always who they're going to be. It's a blessing to raise a child, but some children don't necessarily turn out the way we raise them for a lot of different reasons. But there are people in our lives that we do have to make decisions on. And we want to make informed decisions. We want to be patient and connected, and communication is key in regards to that. So we don't want to project onto them how we think things are or should be, or I was going to put one of the things is love bombing. You see this a lot in relationships where at the beginning there's they call it the rose-colored glasses phase, and there's a lot of love bombing. I love you, you're the best thing ever, da 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 da. And then they forget, it's like, oh, actually we're very different. We see life very differently. You see this a lot even in the workplace. Everything's great vibes in the beginning. You're a new worker, you want to be everyone's friend, you need me to go work, 16 hours today, I'll do that because I just started here and I don't want to upset the apple cart. I want to be a team player. But how sustainable is that when that creates an expectation? So make informed decisions about the type of relationships you have with your boss, your coworkers, your family, intimate partners, etc. Choose to live in a reality that creates a better life. No matter how you feel, no matter what happens, try to find a reality that makes your life better. Mentally speaking, we did a presentation on feelings. The way that you feel has great power over you and your subconscious and in how you act. So make sure you're trying to choose feelings that align yourself with feeling better about your life and about yourself. And remember that we reap what we sow. How we treat people, or how we treat ourselves, the kind of things that we do, those things come back upon us. So if we're setting boundaries on people in a really messed up way, if we're subjugating someone and saying, hey, if you don't do this, I'm going to do all these terrible things to you, guess what? People might become aware of that and say, well, I'm going to do that to you now. I'm going to set a boundary with you at work this way. I'm going to do it. Your own child, they've written songs called The Cat in the Cradle, The Silver Spoon, is, oh, you did that to me, so I'm going to do it to you. And so remember that we reap what we sow. It's very important to understand that. I think it's a very beautiful thing to understand. Their actions are their choice. What you will put up with is yours. So what people are doing is really their choice. You have no choice in the matter, ultimately. At the end of the day, you can inform them, but if they choose to do it, that's their choice. But where you have your freedom and your power is, what are you willing to put up with? That is where your power comes in. That is where your boundaries, that is where the consequences and the rewards come in, is what are you going to deal with? That's your power. And stay focused on your power, not the power of other people, and not trying to control others as well. And lastly, I love this quote. It's very powerful. It touches me very much and personally. Surround yourself with wise people. If there's anything you could take from this presentation, find wise people and surround yourself as much as you can, little by little, with people that are wise. Why? Because whoever corrects a mocker invites insults. Whoever rebukes the wicked incurs abuse. Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you. I love that quote, because it speaks to a lot of things in life. When we see people going through stuff in life, we tell them, hey, I want to set this boundary, or hey, I want to be close to you, or I want to connect to you, I want to make our relationship better because this is going on, or that's going on, or I don't like how you're doing this. And if you're around people that anytime you tell them something, when you're correcting them, when you're showing something they're doing wrong, and they get angry at you, and they don't like you, and they don't want to connect with you, that tells you a lot. You're getting a ton of information by that. But the best relationships you'll ever have in your life, the best relationships you'll ever experience in your whole life, is when you can tell someone how you really feel, and they love you, and they still want to connect to you. They understand where you're coming from. Hey, you know what? We can be better because this relationship has value. Thank you guys so much for your time.